So what do you like about reading, Andrew?
I like when our listeners request books for us to do. And what do you like about reading, Crystal?
Well, I like that too, Andrew. It's not a bad deal.
It makes our life easier, everybody. Welcome to the Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast, the podcast where we talk about what's too hot and what's too cold, what's just right with a self-published work. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Crystal.
And Crystal, what did we read this week?
This week we read Havocs Cry, Victoria Novak, Paranormal Division. So it's part of a series, book 1.
Okay.
It's by Loren Weaver.
Tell me a little bit about how this book came to us. How did we find this book?
Loren actually asked me to read it, so it was a request.
What's this book about?
This book is about Victoria Novak. She is the world's only known sorceress. So in this world, paranormals are known to humans. So we've got, vampires, werewolves, the whole shebang. And she's running from her past, sort of becomes a minion in the working world like us folks.
She gets a job.
She gets a job.
9 to 5.
But then the Federal Paranormal Division is formed and wants her. And so she joins up with them to kick some bad paranormal ass.
And this is a little bit of a crime drama type book, isn't it?
Right. So I kind of describe it as, at least in my mind, Buffy meets CSI.
Now tell us a little about the main character, Victoria Novak, our Buffy here.
She's coming from a interesting past. I don't want to sort of ruin it for everyone.
No spoilers here, right?
Yeah, no spoilers. So she was sort of forced to do things she didn't really necessarily want to do, but because she's a sorceress, some paranormals like to take advantage of that. So it turned her into a bit of an expert on the paranormal, but also a bit of a rough and tough fighting chick.
Yeah, renegade.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
yes.
And what was too hot with Havoc Cry?
I found some of the parts to be too repetitive. So, for example, there was a lot of mentioning about how werewolves like to be touched, and that's cool. That's a cool fact that I don't know a huge amount about werewolves, but
if they're dogs, all dogs like
that
to
is
be pet.
it's a very good it's a very good point. So I thought that was cool. However, it was told to the reader so many times that I eventually just, okay, we get it. We don't need to tell me again.
Yeah, I'm guilty of this in my own writing, even in nonfiction, that I get a pet phrase, and that's just the one that just comes out over and over and over as an author. Like, what do you recommend to avoid either the temptation to fall into a pet phrase or to catch yourself once you've done it?
This is where other readers come in handy to read your work. Most of the time they'll point it out to you and say, you use this word a lot. Some examples from my experience, you use a lot of exclamation points.
Yeah.
So having someone tell you that they found it to be too repetitive is always
to be
helpful.
Very enthusiastic.
Yes, well, or excited. That was my exclamation points.
I am reading.
I am excited. Or shouting. Anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, get a lot of readers to give you feedback on what they found you used a lot of. And chances are, if you read it yourself, if you're using the phrase more than 3 times, words are a bit different. But if you're using the phrase more than 3 times, chances are you're using it too many times. It would have served a better purpose to show me that the werewolves like to be touched, as opposed to telling me, you mentioned dogs. You know that when your dog sits at your feet and looks up at you with their puppy dog eyes, they want you to scratch their belly and get that foot going. So I don't need you to tell me that. I know that.
And what else was too hot?
I found, and this is going to sound funny coming from me, but I found that certain parts were a little too graphically described.
Well, I mean, this is in the horror genre, and it is about the paranormals, right?
It is, and I agree. And I think this goes for, and the reason why I'm laughing is because I tend to go for a bit of the gore in my own writing. And I have had comments where, people say it's been too much. it's a fine line when it comes to horror. You have to really figure out what's too much and what's too little and try and aim for in between. Or do your own thing and go as graphically violent as you want, or not, not as graphically.
But tell the reader you're going to do that. Like, put something on the cover that says that, hey, there's going to be a little bit of stuff in here which is going to make you a little uncomfortable, potentially. If you pick up the book, you're fine with it. If you don't, then here's probably the reason why.
Right. I think, too, again, it is a personal preference. Just for example, you're going over several cases of gruesome murder scenes, and there's 5 or 6 of them. After the first 2, I get it. I get that it's pretty gross.
Yeah.
And so it's enough to say, these were the 2. I shuffled through the rest, and it was more of the same.
And what did you find too cold? What was there just not enough of?
I wasn't sure how much Victoria, or Tori, as she's known in the paranormal division, I didn't know how much she knew about her power. For most of the book, I had the impression that she was this powerful sorceress. People are scared of her. People want her on their team because she's so knowledgeable. But towards the middle and later half of the book, there were some occasions where it was described as she didn't know how she was doing something, that it was just happening.
Yeah.
And I found that a bit of a bump because I had assumed that, and I liked that she was so knowledgeable about the paranormal world and her powers.
In the character's backstory, they're setting her up to be one of a kind and highly trained and a leader of a unique unit. Those people tend not to be surprised by, oh, hey, this is happening, and
right. So it again, it bumped me. I was taken aback a little bit. I had to sort of think things in a different way from what I had been thinking up until that point.
But overall, the powers were pretty cool.
Yeah, I did enjoy the result of her using her powers in a lot of the situations.
Was there anything else?
The opening chapter also bumped me. So there's a prologue, which I thought was great, drew me in completely. Then we get into a first chapter where we meet Tori and Trey, who is a werewolf, her best friend. And the scene starts off, they're playing tag, and they start running through the forest. And you find out a little bit later on that they've been camping as part of a, retreat that their work colleagues have taken. So
and how old are they in this scene?
Right. They are working, so they're in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah. Not a lot of taxpayers play tag on a company weekend retreat.
I don't know what you do. I play tag by myself.
I'm not a taxpayer.
That's not what we're saying.
All right.
So I initially thought that it was a young adult, but, not in sort of the 18 to college area, but, 16 or younger. And then we jump to them being work colleagues, and I was very confused as to what was happening. So I found that first chapter read really, really differently from the rest of the book. Mm-hmm. And it jumped out at me a little bit.
And what did we get just right?
I loved Victoria Novak. I thought, she is the character that is just right up my alley.
Yeah.
The reason why I associate this book with Buffy is because I'm a huge Buffy fan, and Victoria had sort of a similar, biting sense of humor, but also this toughness, but also vulnerable. She cared about her people and she wanted them to live. So I really enjoyed the character and her voice.
Well, the character and the voice is the one that's going to carry through the story, right? Like, it can be a really clever plot, but if you don't buy into that main character that you have to follow for 3 or 5 or 7 books, you're not buying the next one.
Well, exactly. So, the fact that Victoria was such a strong had such a strong voice and was such a strong character that really helped to, ignore the things that sort of bumped me.
And that helped the relationship with the Trey character. Yes.
So, as I mentioned, Trey is a werewolf, and there's something that happens to the both of them that, happens sort of halfway through the book. Very interesting turn of events. I've personally never read anything along that vein, so I'm very interested to see if the second book picks up with their relationship, because I'd be very curious to know more about what happens to them now that they're in this situation. But I mean, overall, I thought the idea was really interesting.
Yeah, I like this idea a lot. It's rare that I kick myself for not thinking of an idea. I mean, for me, it makes sense that it's logical that if paranormals are their own entities with, let's be honest, their own laws of physics,
yes,
and they exist, and we know they exist, then we would have to investigate crimes under that lens. Like CSI is DNA evidence and tire tracks and ballistics and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That we get because that's science.
Yep. And
this is not really
yeah.
science. It's paranormal. So of course we'd have a paranormal investigation division.
Right. And
great idea.
In addition to that, I also liked that Victoria was already knowledgeable about the world. So she wasn't coming into it with the perspective of being the protege who learns very quickly and is this amazing fighter within a 3-week montage. She was the one telling her colleagues, if you don't do this, you're dead. If you don't do this, you're dead. And if you don't, smarten up, you're dead. And it put her in a position of power. And I love really strong female characters, and it really worked for me.
Good. So everybody, that was Havoc Cry by Loren Weaver. Where can we find this book, Crystal?
We can find this book in Amazon. And if you are a lover of horror, Buffy, CSI, or crime drama, action adventure, then this book is for you, with the warning that scenes can be pretty graphic.
And where can we find us?
We are all over the place. And you can find us on Twitter at everythingstemp, www.everythingstemporary.com, and we're also on iTunes.
Well, everybody, that's the Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And if you liked what you heard so far, subscribe, leave a comment on iTunes, or tell a friend about it. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Crystal. Until next time, keep reading.
Was I saying that right? Is that like Havoc Cry?
No, it's Havocs Cry with an S.
I cannot read your writing.
Well, I might have forgotten the S after the apostrophe.